Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to Cut the Shit, a podcast series that aims to take a closer look at the impact of the IT industry, both the good and the bad. Cut the Shit is brought to you by Plow Networks, a managed IT services company based just outside Nashville, Tennessee. I'm Brian Link, EVP of Products and Services here at Plow, and I'll be your host for this series. I'll ask questions, and with the help of our guests, try to dig deep on some of the key challenges we all face dealing with IT. So with that, let's cut the shit and get started. On today's episode, I am pleased to host another edition of Cut the Shit After Hours, our semi-regular series where I sit down with the co-founders of Plow Networks, Brian Law and Cameron Plato, and have a free-ranging conversation about a topic or two of interest. With it being early in the year, today I get them to share their opinions about what business leaders should expect from their IT providers, whether that's internal or external, as well as what they think expectations should be for new IT partners and employees. And lastly, we close out by trying to imagine a world without email. Yes, you heard that right. And we share a few cold weather winter memories. Enjoy. Gentlemen, as always, great to have you back behind the mics with us. How is everybody today?
It's great to be here. Thank you.
We're so good. Happy.
I can tell. I know this is the highlight of your day, so you're welcome. So what else would you be doing if you weren't sitting here talking with us?
Nothing. Just hanging out.
I mean, this is what being a business owner is all about, right?
Yeah, life of luxury.
Don't do much.
No.
Just kind of hang out.
It's the dead middle of winter, and it's gross outside, and it's spitting snow, and it's gray. But thanks to our production team, we have this seasonal affective disorder hot light in my face. So I'm starting to feel more up.
I'm in Miami right now with the lights, for sure.
I got dopamine flying. I feel good.
Sure. I mean, it is the dead of winter, and even though it's Nashville and it hardly ever snows, it actually is snowing out the window right now. It's not going to stick, but
it is
nevertheless. And it's kind of a weird time of year in my mind. Like, it's one of these times of year where this sort of really 2-month period, January, February, maybe into March, but really January, February from my perspective, it's like a combination of busy and not busy, because like on the calendar, there's not a lot going on. It's kind of a dead period. I mean, sports, other than NFL playoffs, there's not much going on. The NBA's in the middle of theirs. If you're a sports fan, it's kind of a lull. There's not a lot of holidays. I mean, there's a couple, but they're not. It's not like you're coming right off of Christmas, so it's sort of like a drops down, right? But it always, to me, has always felt busy from a work perspective because, I mean, practically speaking, what the hell else are you going to do, right? You might as well work because there's not much going on, and unless you live in South Florida or California or something, the weather's not necessarily great.
Well, and it gets dark while you're still here at the office.
That's the other problem.
Well, and that's true.
But it's starting to change.
Days are shorter.
We're having that conversation. They're lengthening.
All that's true. So I think a lot of people they're trying to get rolling on, they've got annual plans. If they have an annual plan, some people don't do that. But if you do, you're in the process of trying to get that going or get rolling on that. And so in thinking about that, it made me, that leads you to expectations. Like you got to try to be successful about doing some initiative, making something happen. And so you're going to have expectations about how that's going to go and how people might behave or perform around that. So it got me thinking a little bit about if you're a business person and you've got an IT service provider, that could be internal or external, right? What would be a fair set of expectations for that business person to have relative to their IT service provider? And it could be quality things or whatever, but it might be performance and mentality or philosophy, things like that. So I thought what we do is start a little bit like, in terms of y'all's perspective, what should, the business side of the house of a company, and again, we'll just in our mind's eye keep in mind, we're not talking about a small company, we're not talking about a giant one, a mid-sized company, they've got some internal people, probably they don't do everything, but they have expectations of that group, and they've got enough leadership to where that person probably has a seat at the table to talk to. So what would be the expectations that the business should have from that group as you think about going into a year?
Well, I'm glad you started with the easy questions.
Of course,
always. So I have a general opinion about what I think business, non-technical or non-IT folks think about IT, and I think that probably you almost have to establish that as a baseline and assume that what you're asking about is, hey, let's actually do this right this year. Let's come up with some, objectives and some, quantifiable measurements and that sort of thing. I think for the most part, as a basis or baseline to this, I think that a lot of times there's a recency bias to whatever sort of judgment they're passing on IT. Have I heard a lot of noise lately from the service desk, or have people been complaining to me, or is it, whatever it is, and that comes into play about, well, that must be the quality of what we did last year, or did we get some projects done? Never mind if the projects actually produced an expected result or even accomplished what they had said in the beginning. I think a lot of IT just evaporates into the ether, so I think it would. This is kind of a complicated answer, or maybe a more nuanced answer to your question, but I think it starts with having a defined outcome. Like, what do we expect from IT? Maybe that's your question. I'm just rephrasing it, but it's what do we expect, and are they living up to expectations? If you don't have a defined measurement, then everything you can measure is just subjective to whatever your opinion of the day is. Also influenced by recency bias, right? So. To me, I think, we do a lot of service delivery around here, and we do it at an aggregate scale, almost like a large enterprise with a lot of very diverse departments. Those departments essentially are our clients, and the enterprise is all of our clients in aggregate. So that requires some pretty complicated and robust KPIs. Those KPIs, at the end of the day, are somewhat simple in the, it's quality of service. So you get that's subjective. That's feedback from clients and that sort of thing. Have a way to measure the productivity of that department. Have a way to measure the quality of what the department's doing. And frankly, the goal there is just to decide, is this working or not for our business? What works in one business may not work in another. It may not matter. If the people on the service line aren't happy. I mean, I don't say that nobody cares, but somebody might not care. Somebody might care if the accounting department can't close out the books in a timely fashion because of some IT issue. So, define what's most important to you in your specific business, and then come up with, quantitative ways to measure that. And I think that requires you to have mature systems and process and procedure where people are disciplined to use those systems appropriately. Because, if you throw, a fly in the ointment and people aren't using it correctly, well, then who cares? You've ruined it all, and the data is flawed. So that's probably a horrible answer, but that's my waxing on it.
It was a horrible answer.
I thought so.
But
I'm glad you said so.
Yeah. I really don't have anything to add to it. I do. The one point you made, I think, that was worthy. I'm just kidding.
It was about 10 seconds left, 5-minute dissertation.
The whole maturation piece of it, I think, is important, and understanding where you are from an IT perspective and what the business is expecting. It's different in medium-sized businesses. We've seen, very immature IT organizations to very, to fairly mature, and I think that dictates drives a lot of it.
And you mentioned a couple different types of information and data. Maybe KPIs or I would think you'd want some business plan from, again, since we're talking internal, right? You'd want some business plan. What resources do you need? Do you have what you need based on? We're going to assume that there's some expectations that have been set from the business about here's what we're trying to achieve on the business side. We're going to flip the script on that in just a minute. But assuming that those are there, then that seems to be, there's a finite list of things to say, here's kind of what we think we ought to have informationally or data-wise. Do you guys have a sense? I mean, I've been in different organizations where it's different, but in terms of a cadence that makes sense for sharing that information, what do you think makes sense that doesn't become cumbersome? Because, you can give somebody a dashboard and show them real time, whatever, and most likely the business person's not going to pay it. They can't. It's not relevant on a minute to minute basis.
I think there's two sides of IT, and I think oftentimes IT, for the most part, is relegated to a service provider, meaning it's, hey, you're here to react and respond to and provide, necessary services for the business. Yeah. So that's more of a, here's what we expect from you, hopefully defined, and then, show me that you're doing that. Yeah. The other side of it is IT as an enabler, meaning something that, how do you leverage technology to accelerate the growth of the business or increase the profits or whatever measurement you're looking for there. That has to be done proactively on the front end, and I don't think those conversations happen quite as often as IT IT people would like you to believe they do. That would mean you're sitting down at the table with the executive team and talking about how technology can empower the business, not how it can just make sure, Betty's printer works. So,
which is important, but to your point, these are fundamentally different.
They're very different things.
Roles, right?
And so, those get measured obviously and executed and measured differently. So, but to the extent that, a cadence, I mean, I'm a big believer in self-service. That's why we invest so much around here in dashboards and portals and all that sort of stuff. It's like, if you want the information, you're going to want the information likely at a time when it's inconvenient for us to deliver the information to you. Somebody's got a wild hair up their ass to sit around and do a report that night, and they want some depth to it.
Right.
I'll bet you our team's not sitting around ready to hand it to you. So so what we end up doing is putting these in the portals. I think there's a necessary cadence. We've seen the fruits of our labor around establishing cadence to specific meetings. We do a morning huddle around here. That was a pain in the ass to get started in the beginning, and it felt empty in the beginning. So, but it bears fruit over time. Honestly, I think it depends on the volume and the criticality of the service being provided. For example, if you provide IT services for a contact center, I mean, it may be twice a day that you're checking in on how are things being delivered.
Sure, because you can't do the job without
That's
it.
correct. But, if you're just providing basic IT services to an organization that I mean, frankly, it's just an accessory to how they're getting things done or making money, then I'd say, weekly is usually pretty good. Monthly to talk about more strategic goals, and we're checking on those, and quarterly, obviously, where we at and what we said we were going to do this year becomes
when you get to quarterly, semi-annual, annual, right? You're talking about strategic discussion.
Correct.
Right?
It should be anyway.
Yeah, I mean, for sure.
And then, like I said, self-service dashboards where people can see data that's predefined as deemed important, that sort of thing, I think is a key kind of a key technology to have at your disposal. So
yeah, and I mentioned it, but I think we ought to do it. Let's go ahead and flip it and think about what is it that IT teams need from the business to be able to do their job effectively.
Direction.
Yeah, but what does that mean? Like, how would you describe that?
Yeah.
And maybe we can even use the example of us in terms of the services we deliver to people, because we were talking internal, but I mean, at the end of the day, this I don't think is really any different, internal versus external. If you're trying to do if you're trying to do the job, and be integrated.
I'll tell you what I've seen internally, and obviously I've seen this with our customers, and I see it, with issues we might have with a customer, and that's assumptions, right? So it's the lack of clarity and definition. If I say I'm going to do something, you say you want something from me, and I say, okay, yeah, I'm going to do that. Until and unless it's recommunicated back to you with kind of sub bullets or more micro level detail, there's a lot of opportunity for that to be misinterpreted between both parties. So what I'd love to see, I think that every business should have a strategic plan published, but really for IT, a 3-year horizon, becomes more real, and a 1-year horizon. And I think a lot of IT people are pretty bright about interpreting the business objectives and where technology can, satisfy or fulfill or subsidize those achieving those objectives, and getting those and redistilling those down into some more tactical kind of engagements or tactical activities needs to be distilled out inside the walls of the IT shop and then recommunicated back up to business. And I think by doing that, it also offers an opportunity to say, this is what I heard you say, and this is how we're going to tackle this. This is what we expect as an outcome. Does that match what you're thinking?
Right.
And that volleying back and forth to establish crystal clear clarity is rarely done, in my opinion. I've only seen it really performed with people from our position back to a customer, because there's obviously money, it's real money, like there's a monetary exchange taking place, not just making payroll, but inside shops that are really, really mature. That's the other place I see it. So, but I think that becomes a critical source of both sides see it happen. Both sides, meaning the one delivering the information and the one kind of responding to it, being in this case the IT shop. I think that those two kind of give each other a pass quite often. It's saying, well, I didn't probably give you all the details, so I'll take your half-ass answer, and vice versa. Right. And at the end of the day, that's where you get unclear objectives and the recency bias, whatever's been going on. And so everybody gets a pass and nothing gets done. Stuff gets done, but nothing concrete gets done.
What makes it any different, truly, than how you handle every department? Right? I mean, it's still the same. I mean, marketing needs that type of
Right.
information. Accounting needs that type of information. Everybody needs the
Sure.
information around goals and objectives in order to be able to formulate, even a company as small as ours, to formulate their plans, that tie into those things. So IT shouldn't be any different. I just feel like it. I feel like it is, though.
Yeah,
I feel
I
like
do too.
there's not as much of that dialogue, and we see it every day when we get in the middle of a new client, and we can have those conversations, and the business is going this way, and IT might be going this way, and it's really, sometimes it gets put on IT. It's not necessarily their fault because they just don't know the direction. And if marketing doesn't know direction or sales doesn't know direction, I think you're probably not going to get where you're trying to go.
Yeah.
Well, we started to see more. Some of this came to a head this past year in 2022 because historically, let's say, for example, you needed equipment, product, physical goods. That was always, more or less available within a 30-day window tops. All of a sudden now you're getting 6 months, 12 months, 18 months out on these things, and not knowing in advance meant you didn't have stuff. Well, if you're a company that's in the middle of acquiring or rolling out de novo sites and that type of thing, you needed stuff. IT's the last to know. All of a sudden you're going to miss dates if you don't have stuff. Well, why didn't you tell me about that? Well, you don't need to know. Well, I needed to know 18 months in advance. So it started to bring, I think, a little more of an awareness around, hold on a minute, this stuff isn't instantaneous. It's not, the Netflix of IT service delivery. Like, it's not on demand. So.
Yeah, and I think the cloud kind of, there
The
is
cloud
more.
spoiled people
There is
too.
more on demand,
Yeah.
right? It's not wrong, but it also has I think led to that mentality. Like, well, when I need it, I can just turn it on.
That's
right?
correct. And
that
our habits
doesn't
started
always,
to become.
That's not always the case, right?
Yeah.
And your point is, even if it is the case,
It doesn't mean it's right.
well, because at the end of the day, just buying stuff. What we're talking about is a different question. What stuff? Like, because there's a bunch of different kind of stuff to buy. Like,
Yeah, there is.
depending on what you're trying to do with that growth and those locations and that business growth, it should dictate the kind of IT, the kind of IT solution that makes the most sense relative to what the goal is, right? And that
Correct.
isn't always. If the IT shop doesn't know, now maybe it's on them to ask. If you ask and don't get an answer, or you get a shitty answer, then I guess it's not all your
Well,
fault.
no one remembers that
but
part.
it's both. Yeah, it's incumbent on both
Keep the
parties,
email.
right?
Yeah, right.
If it's going to work well, and I think about us. We talk a lot about trying to be a business first place. Business first, then IT second, and I think we have to continue to work hard at that, because that isn't always. It doesn't always work out that way on the front end, because I don't know that everybody's used to that. Look, if you need internet, a lot of people will just come in and say, what do you need? And whatever your answer is, they'll just give you something, right? And that's maybe not the right question, but it could feel like it's the right question.
It's always the question behind the question, right?
Yeah.
And I think that we, as the style of our organization, and I'd love it if everybody acted this way, is don't take it at face value. Ask the question behind the question and seek that clarification and understanding. And frankly, a lot of our clients, especially until we get sort of indoctrinated into kind of just knowing each other and our processes, I think it's a little off-putting at first when we ask so many questions. But
Yeah, and it may feel somewhat
It's a little
invasive. Like, wait a
invasive,
minute,
yeah.
I don't know that I want to tell you all this. And I on the one hand I get that, but at the other end of the spectrum is, well, if you want this done right and to maybe help you get to where you're trying to go, you don't really. It's kind of like going to the doctor and not telling them
Right, the
everything.
whole story.
It's probably not a good idea, even if it's uncomfortable in the process.
Well, I find that, and this is kind of a guess, but at least half the time we ask those questions, the person we're asking doesn't have the answer. And ironically, they also see that I don't have the answer, and I know it's ridiculous I don't have the answer, but nobody's willing to give it to me. So, I understand why you're asking. I'd love to know too. But it does, I think, at times make our clients feel more comfortable too, because they're like, I'm sitting out here on an island by myself. I'm asking those questions and being told they're silly. Maybe at some point they start to think, am I silly for asking silly questions? The answer is no. You're asking real questions that you need answers to. And we're asking them as well for the same purpose.
So we've talked. We talked about it, internal, external service providers, kind of mixed. But are there specific things that the business should expect different from an external service provider versus an internal? And I don't know if the answer might be no, but I'm just
I would
curious.
argue it's even more so internally. Externally, you've got you pay a bill once a month, presumably for an SLA-backed specific scope of services. Internally, you're making payroll, and so what you expect from those people ought to be pretty well defined. If not, it just gets massaged into the overhead of the organization, and there aren't clear expectations, and it becomes very easy to just be lazy about that in terms of what you're, either investing in or expensing out, right? So internally, I think I think a lot of IT shops servicing their companies would not external but internal would benefit from being held to the same set of standards that an external service provider would be held to. Now, funny enough, the standards we're held to are the same standards that we publish to customers. In the absence of them having something rigorous to hold us to, we hold ourselves to our own rigorous standards. If customers had it, we'd probably adhere to it just fine. But 9 times out of 10, they don't have it, and they don't even know where to start. So, how would they adopt something like what we've published internally and then hold their own teams accountable to it? There's no way. That's not their gig. That's not what they do. So I think that leaves it kind of loose and undefined, which means, did you hit the mark? I don't know. I mean, where's the goalpost? We moved it today. So,
And I mean, it explains in many ways why the, outsourcing around IT has been effective, right? Because
I think some of the benefit is the definition.
Correct. And that's what I mean. Like, IT people inside an organization versus outside, there's talent in both of those places. This is real more operational know-how and how to do it.
That's right.
That could create, I think it's created an attractiveness to, and I don't mean outsourcing like low-cost labor. I'm talking about, should we do it with the folks internally or with the guys that we've met who are there in our area and they do this as a complement or replacement to that, right? And that's a different kind of a measurement or comparison.
Well, it's a very different service than just plain outsourcing.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think that it puts the onus on the outsourcing piece, puts the onus more on us to be more communicative.
It does.
To our customer, to our client. And I think it puts us in a better position oftentimes to ask more questions because it feels risky to begin with versus having Johnny and Bob that are working internal that you can just kind of tell what to do. We need to know. We need to know where this thing's going in order for us to understand, like, where's the end zone. Mm-hmm. And then it's our job to make sure they understand, in some cases, how we're scoring, right, and what we're doing.
Yeah, and it's the classic example of explicit cost versus internal. I won't say hidden, but kind of buried in the to your point, buried in the overhead versus we're writing a check every month to these guys and gals. What are we getting for that, right? And it's a different kind of a.
I think that's some of the success of outsourcing or some of the success of IT service providers is that it does all of a sudden bring more of a clear focus on the efforts and the output as opposed to it's just in the soup.
Yeah. All right, well, we've gone on that a bit. Let's flip the discussion a little and talk a little bit about expectations around employees, both current and potential. It's not the same, but it's related, right? And I mean, we all know finding and keeping good people is one of business's greatest challenges, right? Everybody wants to get better at that. Even if you think you're good at it, you want to get better at it, right? For all the obvious reasons. And I want to ask specific opinions from the two of you around what expectations do you generally have in your mind when you think about current employees and then potential employees? And I recognize that may be, I won't say unique, but specific to your situations, and doesn't have to just be here at Plow, it could be in the past too. And then we could talk a little bit about how does that sort of translate into, what other people might be thinking about in this context.
Go for it. I mean, that's kind of a tough one because it's pretty broad. Thanks. Nice question, Link.
That's what I do.
So, I mean, I can really only speak to our particular needs, but I mean,
that's fine.
Well, first of all, what clients would be looking, if we make a comparison or a contrasting statement here, if customers are looking to hire internal IT people, to me, those folks, by and large, would service their business better if they were more consultative and both the business expectation and the delivery of it were more consultative and more business analyst type strategists,
right? Not
technicians, because where we've arrived at with technology is so fragmented and specialist by nature that look, the jack of all trades cannot be effective across the entire paradigm and stack of technologies. It just does not happen. If it can be, it's only at a generalist level at best. Right. And so what would be more valuable to an organization is to have a specialist that understands how to apply those technologies and then engage people who obviously are, in depth and adroit at delivery and execution and management of these things. Now, on our side, it's quite the opposite. We do need specialists. We want everybody to have a generalist mentality, but a specialist, set of expertise. You don't want to go to your general nurse practitioner to go, get heart surgery, right? So we need specific specialists here. But the thing we're looking for is typically attitude. Everybody's going to say it's the attitude, aptitude, cultural fit, desire to be part of a team, to not have all of the answers. And that's a unique thing in IT. If you're the guy in the room that doesn't have the answers, then you're the idiot. But that's not true. I mean, I think sometimes the most valuable skill is knowing when to say when. And I don't know what I'm talking about. Okay, right. Fine, good. Somebody else does. Let's make sure we fill that gap. If you're, the lone wolf in the IT shop, you're assumptive that you should know everything, and that's just unrealistic. But I think a lot of businesses think that way about the IT people. So I think what we're looking for, we can find, because we understand we're going to hopefully find somebody that's really good at a certain thing, but that fits in. I think most businesses are looking for one person or a small group of people that are great at everything, and I think that's a silly expectation. It's a silly thing to go out and seek. You're probably not going to find them. It's a unicorn, and if anything, it's a horse that's been painted up with a stick on its head. That's as good as it's going to get. So,
and if you do find them, and then they leave,
they're gone. Yeah.
What do you do?
Right. Yeah, and you mentioned attitude and aptitude, and you talked a good bit about sort of technical capability. You folded in some discernment and analytical skills, but what are some? I mean, when you think about the folks that we're trying to hire here at Plow, how do you get at that sort of softer side, right, and that sort of philosophical alignment? Because I think that's a real challenge for businesses, and it's one that, I mean, there's no magic to it. If there were, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But just curious how you guys think about that.
It's a feel thing, right? But I mean, we started leveraging personality assessments, which is sort of weird and a bit of an overreach, but we started doing that, and those have proven to be pretty accurate in terms of, or reliable in terms of the output. And I'm not saying that not every role inside our organization requires the same personalities. So we've done further defined what's your role, what's your responsibility, what would an ideal candidate look like in terms of their, how they map to a personality assessment. So that's proven pretty effective. I think the other thing is a few interviews, like a series of interviews in different situations with different people. When I say different people, very different audiences, right, in terms of what they're looking for.
Team meeting,
yeah, team meetings.
More of a team style interview. I mean, I think the more eyes that we put on them, the better our chances of not missing.
Get them in a tough situation, get them in a relaxed situation. Just kind of see how they work with people, how they flow.
Get them to lunch, see how they chew.
That's right. You see how they chew. Yeah,
very important.
Any place where we can pass critical judgment on someone is what we're up for.
That's what we're always looking for.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I don't like the way you chew. So that's a shout out to an old friend of ours. You know who you are if you're listening. So, I think. That's a tough one, man.
It is, and
resumes don't speak to any of that.
It is about the questions, though. We've all been through different interview classes and different things like that, and behavioral interviewing versus others. And I mean, I do think that there's merit. I think we've got a couple of guys here that actually conduct a very good interview, and they know the types of questions that they want to ask. They know the examples that they want to see as a part of that. It's one thing to ask a yes or no question. It's one thing to ask a very open-ended question. It's another thing to dig in behind it and say, give me examples of times when it looked and felt and that you did this. And then if you're paying attention, then I believe that you get some of that softer side that you're looking for.
Yeah, I feel
it's hard.
When I think about my own, somebody asked me once about hiring, and I was like, I suck at that. And I don't know, I think if you're honest with yourself, I think probably everybody says that, right? Yeah. If you really are honest with yourself, because it's really hard to do. And the only way to and even then, there's no guarantee of success, as if you can have somebody work for you for a while before they come on full time, right? Because then it's the real thing. It's not an audition. It's real performance.
I think the best system I've seen in terms of formal interview processes is, you obviously post it out. You have very explicit stated, here's what your job is. This is what's expected. Here's how we're going to measure it. All that sort of stuff on the front end. You go through all these interview processes. You have to do the personality assessments, and then it's sort of a temp to hire type arrangement, and then ultimately it's we will write you a check to leave here if you don't belong here within the first 30 days. And so there's an incentive to get good on a mistake that's been made, because usually, and I mean, look, from the time you realize that you made a bad hire to the time you let them go is the longest period in your life. I mean, it takes forever, and it's super expensive. It's frustrating for everybody, and all kinds of emotions.
And our benefit systems and stuff don't help with that.
No, they don't.
They've made that much tougher, right? I mean, it would behoove everybody to have a little more flexibility there. I know why it's not. So that's another podcast. But
yes, don't let systems define your process.
Correct.
But they do all the time.
You're better to not let that drive the way you operate.
I will say too that it makes it very important for us to make sure that we've got our shit together, and that they are walking into a position that's well defined with good set of roles and responsibilities.
That's right.
In order for us to truly be able to judge them. Speaking for the two of us, I know we let some people stay here longer than we should have in the past, and it really came down to, I think, he and I just not feeling good about the direction that we gave them. And it was like you
we'll
wanted,
make it our fault first by default.
Yeah,
typically.
you wanted them to just kind of take off like we do, and some people they just need better direction. They're not just gonna go try new things and think, there's a broken process here, I'm gonna fix it and we're gonna move this forward. And then we would sit there and go, God, we should have given them. Let's give them more time.
Right.
Let's give them. And to your point earlier, like you can't. Like if you can
it
figure it out in 30
never
days,
works.
that's kind of hard. But you can certainly. We should certainly be able to figure it out in the first 90.
Well, it's a catch-22 too, as well. I mean, in our business, we're looking for technologists in very specific roles that we understand ourselves, because that's the business we're in. If you're, a medical practitioner trying to look for an IT guy, how do you even write that job description? How do you even write those roles and responsibilities? You don't even know what they're doing.
Or you get some help doing it. Right. How are you going to really be able to evaluate it? Right?
Sure.
I mean,
usually you get Googled and you end up with a half-assed job description that might have some alignment just based on generalities with your business, but it's not going to be specifically what you need. And that's a tough one. I mean, this is why we do what we do. But I don't envy people looking for IT help or trying to build an IT department or restaff an IT department.
No, and it folds back into the conversation we're just having around expectations, right? And the success of outsourcing as a whole is because I think most business people are like, the last thing I really want to try to do is try to figure out how to hire good IT people when I don't know much about IT anyway. Like in the situations you're talking about where the company's not big enough where they have IT leadership and IT doers, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a really hard place to be.
I mean, it's atypical, but I think probably the most effective thing for people, let's say they don't want to outsource, is to define an outcome and then post that as the job description. Like, here's what I want to get done. How you get it done is up to you, but this is how I'm going to gauge whether or not something was accomplished. And that's about as in-depth as anyone should go. Otherwise, it starts to be counterproductive.
Yeah, for sure. All right. I just felt like that was it seemed relevant given the time of year and sort of the thinking, sort of folding into thinking about annual planning. Got one last topic I want to touch on that has literally nothing to do with anything along those lines.
Those are my favorite.
Other than something I read that I thought was interesting. And it's really everybody's favorite business tool, the subject is, and that's email. I know how much you guys love email.
Cameron loves email.
I particularly love
hate
it.
email.
I write it notes regularly. I think about it a lot.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out you guys have a lot of company if you don't like email. And it's like I don't know anybody who does like email, but everybody uses email. And there was this article in the Wall Street Journal last month. It was about Cloudflare, this acquisition they had done, like a small company that they were really trying to put a lot of juice into going into 2023 because it was about basically email security. And that's what this product is for. And they were trying to get better trying to make sure email's more secure, right? Because the bottom line is email is not secure, right? It's not secure at all in terms of the way it works. That's part of why it's so ubiquitous and works so well, but it's not secure. And that article, it wasn't even that interesting. I'm reading it because it's IT shit and whatever.
If you published it, nice work.
But there was something in that article that was particularly interesting. And the CISO from Colgate, they quoted a bunch of different people, but the CISO from Colgate Palmolive was quoted. And this is what he said. And let's pause for just a second after I finish reading this, because just let it sink in for a second. He said, "It would be great if companies would switch away from email and start using other services, but people don't change." Now, I don't know what the breadth of that quote was, but that's the quote in the article.
I dissect that a little bit and make everything I'd say past this point based on one assumption. And the assumption is work is email, email is work. Because if you were to walk into any institution, by and large, my opinion is people sit in front of their computers and stare at email most of the day. If they're not actively engaged in a specific project or in a meeting with other people, they're looking at email. Not as like a scheduled thing. If you think about the physical equivalent, it's walking to your mailbox. If you walk to your mailbox and did that all day long, every day, sun up to sundown, you'd look like a crazy person. But that's literally what you're doing.
You'd also have to have the mailman stopping by your mailbox every 5 seconds.
It's silly. Right? The whole concept's silly. So but people default to habitual kind of behaviors, and that's, let me look at email, let me see, because it's, I don't know if it's the instant message dopamine hit of like taking a quick look at something, or you're just looking for something to do, or it's pacifying you to go to email. But truth be told, my opinion is pretty strong on this. If you need something, don't send me a freaking email. Like, it's great for document. I'm not going to pin an email to tell you to go take out the trash. That's crazy. Like, it's instant message. We have lots of different communication and collaboration tools. Email's a horrible one. And I think that people, like I said, sit down and look at it to try to find what's next in their day. So if you don't set up discrete times to say, I'm going to go check my email and actually process it, categorize it, put it now, later, whatever, determine what to do with it, reference, whatever, you're just going to sit down and thumb through it like entertainment. And that's not what it's for. And so I think fundamentally the whole damn system's flawed. Let me get off my soapbox because I hate email. But
It creates the behavior. As you were talking just then about the mailbox analogy, I started thinking about a contact center environment, and where you're sitting there and you're waiting in queue for that next call. Like you're taking the next call. The call happens, you hang up. There might be a brief period for documentation, and then boom, the next call comes through. Yeah. And I think about people that just sit. Think about this: when people come back from being out sick or being on vacation, what's the first thing they say? They say, hey, I'm going to catch up on email today. I'm going to get caught up on email. Not I'm going to meet with the different groups in the organization,
reestablish my priorities,
to make sure that there's nothing out there that is waiting on me today.
Right.
I'm going to go and I'll feel better when I check on email. And then I think it's also when in doubt, back to the contact center. It's when in doubt. Is there something in there I can respond to?
Yeah.
100%. And interesting. I found this really interesting, and here's why. Because there's a book called A World Without Email that was written about almost 2 years ago by a guy.
It's a fantasy novel.
Yeah. Well, it was a joke of a title to a certain degree. It was written by a guy named Cal Newport. He's a computer science professor at Georgetown, and he's a proponent of stuff like slow productivity and deep work around knowledge workers. He's not talking about going out in the woods and chopping trees down or whatever. He's talking about how do you get better at doing knowledge work, right? He's a computer science professor.
Knowledge work.
Sort of be here now kind of concept.
Yeah, and he says, this is so rewind 2 years ago, people have been talking about email being a problem from a productivity standpoint for a long time. This isn't new, right? And the proliferation of the ability to check your email from your phone, so now you can check it wherever the hell you go. Lots of problems with that people have identified, right? Work-life balance, stress, tactical versus strategic. You can go on and on, right? It goes all the way back to Stephen Covey's 7 Habits. Like, what quadrant are you working in? And email's very rarely in the right one. So what I found interesting about this is this guy's basically saying the same thing, but maybe this is actually the chance. Maybe this is a tipping point for companies, because email is the biggest security problem for every company in the fucking world.
You're right.
Well,
We want to sell. There's DDoS, anti-DDoS, we got millions of brilliant people all over the world trying to figure out how to come up with with machine learning and AI to prevent intrusions and people hacking in and doing stuff. And the real problem, and we always joke about it, but it's John in accounting getting an email and sending money to somebody. And that is, it might be high tech how he
dumbass John.
Yeah.
It might be. Well, we always use Betty, and so I'm going to a dude
Yeah,
because it's
John.
not Betty. It's
Right.
anybody, right? And
Inherently, it's
and
Betty.
what this guy, I think this guy's actually onto something. What he realizes is that the business has got to change. The business has to force change around how email is used if we're going to solve the security problem. It's like the old. It's like I always say about the internet. The internet is an open protocol. So we've tried to figure out how to make it secure when fundamentally it's not built for that.
Correct.
And so we're never going to get there. I mean, we can get more secure, but it's never going to be secure. And email is the same way. Email's never going to be secure. So the simple answer, if you're the CISO, would be like, we don't do anything financial on email, period.
Yeah.
It's got to be in a different kind of, either you're writing it, you're going over to somebody's desk, you're sending them a carrier pigeon, I don't care, but it's not going to be on email, right?
Yeah.
That seems like, I was just curious, do y'all see that as a potential tipping point to change our relationship with email? Because when you listen to people talk about email, they talk about it like it's this immovable force that we can't do anything about. I mean, you just bitched about it for 15 minutes, and everybody bitches about it, and nothing changes. Because he says, now he's maybe a little bit of a skeptic, or maybe he was just trying to be provocative, but he said, but people don't change. Well, people can change, but it's hard. And so what's it going to take for people to
Someone's
change?
got to tell them to change. Like it's not going to just change.
Correct. I mean,
in the
I
masses.
think his point is my CEO needs to tell people,
Yeah.
if you send a request to somebody by email for a financial thing, you're fucking fired.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's a
I mean,
pretty, that's a
honestly,
pretty
I
specific,
think that's where
He's
it's.
fired up,
Yeah,
man.
yeah.
I mean, I think that's
a
where
pretty
you're gonna end up.
specific thing. But I mean, look, we had a client this week had literally the same thing happen. It was somebody clicked on a phishing campaign, and you know what? Look, somebody has a couple cocktails and gets on their phone and starts fucking around with
That's
email.
the
That
phone.
happens all the time.
The
And
phone gets really bad.
people don't. It'd be like me saying, "Hey, you're Border Patrol. Stand here at Border Patrol. Also, you can eat your lunch here. You can have a few cocktails here. You can be half asleep and open up with one eye and look at your phone. Like you're right to do a half-assed job just because it's the same unified interface. So
Because you're trying to clear it out.
yeah, you're
too.
trying to
The
do whatever it
tactile
says. So
mindset of
you've
like,
got
oh,
all
gotta
these.
get rid of this. Gotta get
Yeah,
rid of
you got all
this.
these weird psychological
Yeah, I mean,
underpinnings
it's
of
just,
being
I'm just
sloppy.
curious. Like, wonder what it's gonna. What is it gonna
Tell
take?
you what, I'll pick one. You want to get them kids off TikTok, or you want to get people to stop fucking with email? Because both of them have the same outcome. People don't change. They won't change, and it doesn't matter how many times you get burned. Literally, people. I forgot the figure I saw the other day, but it was in the hundreds of billions of dollars in exploits that took place in
Yeah, I mean,
2022.
ransomware and phishing is that. Those are the two
easiest thing.
biggest security breach issue,
Yeah.
categories by 1,000 miles.
And social engineering is,
And I don't
is still
think-
a thing, but primarily it's phishing.
I don't think the spending. I don't think the spending lines up with that.
it doesn't at all. No, it doesn't at all.
And what I guess what we're talking about here actually doesn't cost anything.
Well, if you look at all the things we
I mean,
do
other
around
than change, other than
anti-phishing,
process change.
Yeah.
so anti-phishing education is great. It says, hey, open the email, look at it, think about this, be diligent, double check it. That's fine when you're sitting there cognizant of what you just learned. When you're on your phone at 1 a.m. because you can't sleep and you're thumbing through it one eye in the dark, I promise you're going to click on something eventually where you weren't thinking about your anti-phishing training.
Yeah.
It's a horrible tool. I don't like it.
What is it good for? Like, let's flip it for a second.
Documentation.
What's it good
which
for?
I don't think it's supposed to be,
Yeah.
but it's people use it all the time to keep a historical archive or record, an audit trail of communique, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's just how it works.
I'd say that the second would be communication to the masses, similar to a conference call.
Yeah,
hey, 15 people NCR days, 30 people. Whatever
Attachment
it is.
handling,
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, you got to have.
Yeah, but attachment handling back to security, that's a problem.
No, there's much better ways.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
much
it's
better
but
ways.
it's like, what's for lunch? It's hey, can we have a meeting? It's everything but that.
There's a lot of poor discipline in using the tool as well. But I think, everybody grows up with it now. We're at a point where there's very few people in the world that didn't grow up with email now, or at least had it in their life longer than they didn't have it. So how do you change their the how do you do it? There isn't like a speed limit for email. I mean,
I feel like it's. I mean, and I'm channeling Cal Newport here a bit. He actually thinks it's going to be a strategic advantage for certain companies if they figure out how to manage these.
Well, let's look
better.
at how. If you take on average take your payroll and assume 20% of it's going to fucking with email. That's not I feel like I'm being very conservative.
yeah.
You're
assessment.
super conservative
So
with that.
if I went to you and said, hey, guess what? I'm going to take your payroll and I'm going to ask that you spend 20% more so people can play on their computer. That's literally what it is.
I mean,
That
it doesn't mean that
crazy
all
as it
email
is.
is useless. But
no.
there's
Otherwise
no way
I'd
to
say it'd
suss
be
out.
50%.
But because of the way we're doing it today, there's no way to suss out
Yeah.
what's really important versus what's not, right? And that's. Anyway.
You could do a whole podcast on just this, and there's a couple people we know that are super passionate about this and have ideas about.
Well, I mean,
it.
It's not a new topic. Just seeing a security guy frame it the way he did, I thought was really interesting because it felt like maybe this is the way. Maybe this wakes us up to say, just because we have this tool doesn't mean we have to use it the way we're using it.
Right.
That's it's like anything else. Just because you have a hammer, you can hit certain things with it, but you shouldn't hit everything with it. And that's kind of what it feels like we've done with email. We've crammed a lot of business needs into this communication device, right?
Yeah.
Or communication tool, and it's not for that.
Well, about once or twice a year, I go through this obsession over email. Not obsessed with email, but obsessed on the topic of email. And I did this probably in October of this past year, and said to hell with it. I'm going to stick to my guns and do something a certain way. I did find it was interesting. I get 40-1 emails in terms of junk email to legitimate email, and out of emails that are legitimate, 9 out of 10 don't have anything to do with me directly. They're more FYI, just
Right,
in
you're
case.
getting copied.
Yeah. So
And we're a small company. That's way worse than a big company. Trust me.
I'm sure. And so, you start to think about the irrelevance of most of it causes you to be sloppy and
And there's no
attuned
way.
also.
I mean, again, there's tools for them to try to say, well, this is important, this is not. But like back to the thing, it's not really good at that.
Yeah.
You have to discern that yourself. So,
Yeah.
anytime
not
you're
changing
spending.
subjects, putting you in the CC line when it really has to do with you. But there's a lot of poor email etiquette out there as well.
Sure. But it gets back to the whole problem. I mean, now you're talking about email etiquette and training people how to use it more effectively. When at the end of the day, it just sucks.
That's right.
We lost 2/3 of our listeners when we started bitching about email because everybody knows they're guilty of being part of the problem.
Like, God damn it.
Sorry,
Thanks
guys.
a lot. Yeah.
But those who are still around, thank you for being on Team Hate
Yeah,
Email.
for sure. On that note, we are going to wrap up. But before we do, we've got a couple of, I like to ask.
I know how you do.
I like to get a couple questions. And since it's winter, I figured I'd get you guys to answer a couple of cold weather questions. You going to get the yes man to answer?
I feel like the yes man needs something.
All right. And this one, I'm going to let you answer first because I'm pretty sure I know what Cameron's answer is going to be. But best skiing or sledding
I
memory?
couldn't agree with you more completely.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yes, man. Can't beat him. Best skiing or sledding memory?
Sledding takes you to a whole nother place.
Well, that's why I asked.
Yeah.
And I don't ski, so,
So skiing, we've had lots of good ski trips. That was kind of our thing. Has been our thing over like Christmas holidays. Sledding, it takes me back to Nautilus and the hill that we had at Nautilus. That
people don't know what Nautilus is.
I'm sorry, my street growing up. Well, close.
I knew what it was, but not everybody
Lincoln
else
Law
did.
grew up together, so they knew they both knew what they were talking about. I didn't know what the hell he was talking about.
He knew the general area
Exactly.
for sure. At the bottom, first of all, it seemed like it was way bigger than it was today. It seemed like it was straight down. Of
course.
It's kind of flat.
Like an Olympic
over there
ski
now.
jump?
Yeah. But there was a little gully, kind of drop off that hit. I guess that's Anderson Road right there. So anybody's familiar with Anderson Road knows that's pretty busy.
A fairly busy road, yeah.
And we got a wild hare one day. I don't know if we're 10, 11, 12, 13, something like that. And we decided we were going – I think one of my buddies, Jimmy Haith, was the first to attempt it and hit it. And he hit it just right. Of course, he came off the sled and into the middle of the street.
The separation.
And whatnot. And I had another buddy, and I'll protect his name for this. He decided to hit it. Well, Jimmy didn't tell him that you kind of had to pull up on it a little bit when you bottomed out, and he didn't. So it bit, and he just barreled face first into the side of the. Like, so there was no uplift at all. He just went straight, just dipped, went straight into it.
Hit the face of the ramp?
Yeah, and ended up feet going over the top of his head and still ended up in the street. Just laying there.
Oh, shit.
In the,
Ready to get hit.
in the laughter that took
y'all were
place
like, "That
there.
was awesome."
Yeah, do it again, man. Who's going to try it now? The sled broke, thank God, as a result of that. Shut the whole day down. But
I let
Yeah.
Brian answer because Cameron may have a better skiing memory, but he has a gigantic swollen right knee right now from having a skiing accident last
do.
week or 2 weeks ago.
is that a
So-
good memory?
No, it's not.
No,
I mean,
it's not.
but here's what I've started realizing as you were talking and Link posed the question. I don't know of any event involving snow and shenanigans that didn't end up with an injury. Somebody gets injured every time. Always. It is without fail. Probably my favorite one has to do with sledding's always just silly. And, where we grow up around here, there's not that much snow. So when it happens,
You get real excited.
Everybody's fired up.
Hell
And so
yeah.
mine was a group of guys I saw at the park. There's a park in the middle of Nashville on 12th Avenue that has a little bit of a hill, and it's bordered by a creek. And, when it gets cold here, it doesn't stay cold that long, so the creeks don't really freeze over, but they might get like a light sheet of ice and a lot of snow.
enough.
And I saw a bunch of drunk dudes pile onto a tube, which is unsteerable. It's just mass in motion.
Yep.
Do the same kind of thing where they went flying down a hill, all piled on top of each other, hit the jump disperses in midair, and they all land on top of the creek, which immediately went into the creek. And so they're
They're
all
soaked.
soaked. So it serves them right. That's what you get. I'd be that same idiot if I had been available. Or
I'm sure
invited
they.
to the sled.
I'm sure
Yeah.
they love telling that story about how
Yeah.
awesome it was too. So there's that.
Yeah, but I've got a blown knee right now from hitting a tree. And here's the thing: people versus trees always win. Like that's just the way it goes. They don't give. So
Words to live by, guys.
yeah, hopefully one of our clients will take care of me this afternoon, and I'll get that sorted out.
All right, question 2 of 3. What's the coldest you have ever been?
I don't know exactly where this was. You want to go first?
Oh, you got it.
The
Just for the record, Law and I might have the same. We might have the same memory. It's possible, but
I'm with you there. I think I've been colder, though.
the coldest spot I've ever been in was in Montana in January in the middle of Yellowstone, and it was like negative 47 or something like that. I mean, it gets to a point where cold is just cold, and I'm sure somebody can argue with this if like from Siberia, but like it all feels the
Right.
same. It's bone
minus
chilling
20 and
cold.
minus 50 kind of feel the same.
Yeah.
Right?
Truthfully, though, the most cold I've ever been was when I was on a fishing trip and we were dressed like we were going to Costa Rica. The flight got canceled. We ended up in New Orleans and we went fishing, thinking our attire for Costa Rica would fit the bill. The air was 50 degrees, but the water was probably 30, and so we were on a boat
It
doing
couldn't have
about
been
30 or 40
but-
miles an hour, with all this wind on us, wet with like it's the fog. One of the guys had been in the Marines and had done cold weather training, and he looked at me. He's like, "It's 4 or 5 times colder right now than during doing that." So it's a horrible cold. So that's the coldest I've ever been.
He's just trying to make you feel better.
Yeah.
because I was whining.
He knew you were
Yeah.
a wimp.
Yeah.
So were you thinking
that the
Southwest
word you were gonna
Missouri, or
use?
were you
Yes.
thinking
Yes.
Wichita?
Southwest Missouri.
Yeah, they were both cold. Southwest Missouri was we were playing baseball in the snow.
Yes, it was snowing.
was ridiculous.
It was 28 and snowing.
I think
In
that-
normal uniform, you didn't prepare.
No, I mean we had sleeves on, but you can't play baseball dressed like the
You
kid
weren't
from
playing the
Christmas
snow?
Story.
Yeah.
You gotta have. There can only be so much.
And back then, you didn't have the stretchable Under Armour. Like it was old school long johns, which were tight and very
Right.
restrictive. Like you had choices to make.
I had on a long sleeve T-shirt and my jersey
red then?
and pants and socks.
And where were you?
Southwest Missouri.
Southwest
So
Missouri.
basically
is-
Nebraska, Kansas.
Yeah, what's the city? Springfield? No, it's not Spring. I don't know where it is. I don't care. It doesn't matter. I think actually it's called Missouri State now. It's not called Southwest Missouri.
What about
but
when we got surprised at Southern Miss?
75 degrees and
That-
swimming the night before and playing a game.
and it was 30.
25
yeah,
or
30.
30.
It was a night game. Yeah.
Brutal.
We could go on. People don't want to hear our
Yeah.
stupid baseball stories. So I was, but you said you might have another one.
Yeah, we were duck hunting last year, and we were duck watching, or maybe not even duck watching. I'm not even sure that we saw ducks, but we sat in this.
You were sitting in a duck blind.
Hanging out at a
Yeah.
We
camp.
sat in this blind that we weren't inside. Like it was, we put everything up around it, and there was a
You gotta-
winter wind coming in behind us, And what made me feel like a big wuss is one of the guys that we're with, just crazy redneck dude from Arkansas. He's down there with just like a shirt and some coveralls. He's not even in waders. And watching him, now he was chain smoking, so maybe that helped him. But watching
Kept him
him
warm.
made me feel like the biggest, you know what, alive. But
I think people become acclimated to it.
You do.
I
You
literally
get more used
was
to it.
so cold, and so was my oldest son, that I hurt. Like my hands, they like literally they hurt, and they hurt for like 15 minutes in the truck. I couldn't get out of that damn place
Was
fast
the
enough.
sun up?
The sun was not up.
I said,
it-
once the sun comes up, it gets colder.
There was
like
no sun.
always.
Like it just stayed. It stayed back shaded, and we had a northwest wind hitting us at about 20 miles an hour, and it was about 15
Brutal.
degrees to begin with, and it sucked.
Yeah, that sounds bad.
It made me like,
Especially since you chose, and it's one of those. I chose to be here.
yeah.
What
And we didn't
what the
see
hell's
ducks.
wrong with
If
me?
we were shooting
Yeah.
some ducks, we've been okay, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Duck watching.
Yeah.
All right, last question. Favorite winter drink?
Did we not do this?
And it doesn't have to be a cocktail.
Yes.
No, we did a holiday cocktail. That's different.
Oh, it's probably going to be the same for me.
I like the good old Irish coffee.
It's a good call.
I mean, if I'm going to go with non-alcoholic, I mean, just some good freaking hot chocolate, some vitamin D milk in it, and some, like done
The
right.
whole milk, the real
Yeah.
thing,
very
with some fat in there.
specific.
with the with the fire going, some marshmallows on top.
It's hard to go wrong. Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
That's
Then it's just
Wow.
then it's just whiskey. If it's
Yeah.
That's true.
Brown.
anything I
When
could
it's
drink,
color,
it
it goes
brown.
Feels
That's
right.
right.
Yeah,
That's
brown.
Brown.
Okay, okay, everyone, that's a wrap. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back to our regular scheduled Cut the Shit programming in a couple of weeks. Until then, take care and stay warm.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, we'd appreciate it if you would become a subscriber wherever you get your podcasts. And if you could rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, that would really help us out. Or you can just go old school and tell your friends, your family, your colleagues, and hell, anybody else who you think might want to hear something like this to listen in. If you're on social media, make sure to follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @cuttheshit_pod. We are also on TikTok @cuttheshitpod, all one word, where we post lots of clips from the podcast. And last but not least, you can also watch the YouTube version of the show on our YouTube channel @Plow Networks. Until next time, take care and have a great day.